This first session covers the hot topic of anti-money laundering, and I welcome Mrs. Laurie Wigan, Director, Compliance and Regulatory, and of course our guest speaker for this session, Mr. Calvin Wilson, Executive Director, Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, to the podium. Wigan, Mrs. Wigan rather, will introduce Mr. Wilson. Can I hear a round of applause, sir?
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I wish to extend a warm Jamaican welcome to our delegates and visitors from overseas, especially to Mr. Calvin Wilson, Executive Director of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, CFATF Secretariat in Trinidad and Tobago. Calvin Wilson is a Trinidadian attorney at law who in February 1998 was appointed the Deputy Director of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. In Jamaica, we say CFATF. The Caribbean Financial Action Task Force was established as a secretariat to implement common countermeasures to address the problem of criminal money laundering and terrorist financing. Mr. Wilson obtained his Bachelor of Laws at the University of London and his Master's of Laws from the London School of Economics, where he specialized in corporate law, international finance, and intellectual property. In 1988, he joined the Crown Prosecution Service of England and Wales as Senior Crown Prosecutor and was later promoted to Principal Crown Prosecutor Designate. During Mr. Wilson's 8-year tenure with the Prosecution Service, he prosecuted a wide range of criminal offenses while providing legal support and advice to Crown prosecuting teams, New Scotland Yard, and the Metropolitan Force on commercial and banking fraud, money laundering, and drug trafficking cases. Mr. Wilson is now the Executive Director of CFATF, having assumed duties effective March 1, 1998. Please let us welcome Calvin Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the welcome. And also, I would like to thank Chairman Metcalf for his kind words of welcome as well. I'd like to thank the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Board for the invitation to speak here. And it's a particular pleasure to come back to Jamaica. I was here on Saturday to give a speech in Kingston. So went back home and then came back again. So I'm very pleased to be here on several counts. One, my luggage did not arrive with me yesterday. And as Chairman Metcalf indicated, I have to go on to Spain later on today. So I was very worried that I wouldn't get my luggage. But there's a fantastic woman at the airport. I don't know her surname, but her name is Allison. And she works with American Airlines. And she promised to get me my luggage. And so she did. So I want to thank her for me being here comfortably dressed to make this presentation. The Mistress of Ceremonies indicated this morning that the women played a very important role in terms of organizing this conference. But this is not a phenomenon unique to Jamaica or to this conference. It's happening across the Caribbean. And right below the sort of political directorate, you have a range of women in very important positions. So women rule in the Caribbean. But also what's important as well is that we ensure that we reduce the level of violence that's occurring Trinidad, across the Caribbean, around the world, to young women and young girls and women. The incidence of violence is becoming more and more depraved, and I think we as men and women, need to do as much as we can wherever we are to reduce the incidence of violence. So off the soapbox I will go now. The ministers this morning, Minister Shaw and Bartlett, set the scene for my presentation today, and they made my work somewhat easier because they spoke about, particularly Minister Bartlett, he spoke very importantly about the role the tourism sector plays in Jamaica and around the Caribbean. And he said some very important things which I think deserve a bit of restating because of the importance of this sector and because of the importance of the work that you have to do and the dangers that are at play and could place in jeopardy all that the ministers, both the ministers of tourism and finance, indicated this morning that they wish to achieve for Jamaica. And I'm also pleased that being here because on another count, which is given all the bad experiences that the region has suffered between 1999 and to date, including Jamaica to some degree, because Jamaica was placed on a grey list, and we and a team of officials from the FATF Secretariat, we came and engaged with ministers to ensure that Jamaica got back on track in terms of complying with the international standard. But there are forces at play that may jeopardize all that the minister spoke about in terms of wanting to achieve for Jamaica and for the rest of the Caribbean. But why I'm pleased that I was here today to hear them directly was there's been a question I've been asking myself for the past maybe 17 years doing this job, is what is the Caribbean Basin region's place in the world, and how are we going to get there? I want to say it again, because you are very important people here. What is the Caribbean Basin region's place in the world, and how are we going to get there? Because for a number of years, since 1999, we've been suffering the impact of loss of reputation globally because of failure to comply with international standards that our political masters have agreed to, that the countries around the region have agreed to. And for a long time, we haven't been living up to these obligations. And it's impacting negatively our international reputation. Once you lose your reputation, it's hard to regain, no matter what you do. And that has been the experience of the region over the past 15 years at least. So given all the plans that Minister Shaw and Minister Bartlett outlined today in a very inspiring way, 10 minutes, in a very inspiring way, I think we need to be very careful so that we don't put those plans in jeopardy. Minister Bartlett talked about what was happening in St. Lucia in terms of the racetrack, the engagement with the Chinese government, and Minister Shaw spoke about the road between the north and the south, connecting Ocho Rios to the capital. That's almost synonymous to the Belt and Road plans that the Chinese government has for the rest of the world. So it's important that we take part in that to allow the Caribbean to develop. So the minister said, I want to repeat what the minister said today, to put you on notice as to what you have to do wherever you are in terms of 6 words that I would give you after I restate what the minister said. Minister Bartlett says, the goal for Jamaica is to be a significant player in the gaming industry. And because the gaming sector is of fundamental importance to the Jamaican economy. He says also that tourism is the mainstay, the main industry in Jamaica and the Caribbean. 40% of GDP, 1 in 5 jobs are all related to the tourism sector. He talked about leakage and the damage that may bring about in terms of loss of earnings. But he also said that linkages may be another way in which you can eliminate the leakages. And he said it's paramount to explore a range of options so that the industry, the sector, is not affected by de-risking. And Minister Shaw also said that we need to exploit or expedite the passage of legislation for new products and to increase the market share that Jamaica wants to have in this sector. All of that could be put in jeopardy if we don't adhere to our international obligations. So I want to say 6 words that you should take away with you, I hope, in terms of what you do at the various commissions, what you do wherever you are, in terms of if you are a stakeholder in terms of Jamaica complying with its international obligations. And these words are these: reputation, reputation, reputation. And the other 3 words are compliance, compliance, compliance. Because if we don't do those things together, then we are placing in jeopardy the economic well-being not only of Jamaica or even of the operators in this sector, but also the Jamaican economy, the ability of the government to meet the day-to-day needs of its citizens in terms of providing jobs, but also the economic well-being of the region as a whole. So, I maybe have 7 minutes now. I'm going to talk about this, the evolution of the gaming sector in the Caribbean, and I think both ministers gave a very good picture as to the importance of the sector and how it developed and continues to develop in the region. Looking at where in the past, this was an illegal activity, and now it's regulated by governments, generating considerable revenue for the region, for the country and the region. I'll talk about compliance with the international standards, the dangers of de-risking, typologies in gaming very, very briefly, and importantly, the risk-based approach. And policy recommendations, but I think the ministers gave a good outline as to how the sector is, what you intend to do in terms of merging the various commissions, passing legislation to address new products, and to get a greater market share for this sector. So it is said that interest in gaming can be traced back for 40,000 years, and therefore it's one of mankind's oldest pursuits. And as it was then, so it is now, given all that the minister said, but there have been changes. And the minister spoke about the technological advances, e-sport, online betting. The minister spoke about how the sector has developed over the years. So patrons are it's no longer necessary for patrons to go to premises physically. You can do so online. And there are now new products to be developed in the future. So what was once illegal is now legal and playing a very important role to our national economy. In some countries, government policy for generating revenue to provide jobs and to meet the day-to-day needs of citizens is now directed towards the joint development of tourism and gaming. And Minister Bartlett spoke about that very, very effectively. In other countries, the government is an important player in this sector, with a share of the revenue going to good causes like funding social programs for young people and even training athletes for the Olympics. However, the positive environment in the gaming sector in which the gaming sector operates has to be tempered with the growing and forceful demands of the global agenda, which is dictated by the G7 and G20 and focuses on effective implementation of the international standards to combat money laundering and the financing of terrorism, and also the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And so I want to repeat again the mantra for all gaming operators and regulators should be compliance, compliance, compliance with these standards because of the implications for your international reputation. A strong culture of compliance is important to the viability of the gaming industry, and the tone of compliance should be set from the top. Boards of directors and senior management must ensure that the business is guided by strong AML/CFT policies that provide adequate resources for the compliance function, and that the control systems are monitored regularly and adjusted in keeping with the products that are offered and the risk environment in which the business operates. So as the minister spoke about online gaming, then you have to be mindful that you have to adjust your AML-CFT programs to meet these new products and the risks that they bring with them. The role of the regulators is also important, and it's critical to high levels of compliance with the international standards. Fit and proper testing for new licensees, as well as their associates, in terms of being involved in the management and ownership of gaming houses, or gaming launches, and ensuring that annual filings are done as required, that records are kept for maybe 7 years so that you can assist in terms of law enforcement being able to investigate criminal offenses, bring charges, have successful prosecutions, and eventually take the profit out of crime by confiscating illegal proceeds. Regulators must also take appropriate enforcement action, because if you don't enforce the system, then the operators won't comply. And the reputation of the country would suffer, because it will show that Jamaica is not in keeping with its international standards or obligations to effectively implement the AML-CFT regimes that they've taken on board. Now, Jamaica's AML-CFT regime for this sector and for the other designated non-financial businesses and professions is relatively young. And the CFATF, the organization I work for, we came to Jamaica in 2015. And we did an assessment of the country's AML-CFT architecture. And after that, a report was prepared, and it's now on the CFATF website, cfatf@cfatf.org. And in there, it gives a critique as to the state of play when the assessors came to Jamaica to see what your AML-CFT regime is like. But it identified good practices, but also identified shortcomings. And there are some shortcomings in this sector that need to be addressed. And I'm sure that with greater dialogue between the Commission and with the operators operating in the sector, that those recommendations will be addressed, so that when Jamaica reports back ever so often to the CFATF plenary meetings, that it would be shown that Jamaica is progressing in terms of implementing the recommendations. Now, there's supposed to be a national anti-money laundering committee in this country, and that should be fostering dialogue between all stakeholders in terms of this sector and other sectors, all stakeholders in the country adhering to the international standards against money laundering, and also importantly protecting the reputation of Jamaica. Because this is where the threat of de-risking comes in. Now, as I said before, Jamaica was placed on the list. We came here, we spoke to officials, the ministers, public sector officials, and eventually Jamaica was taken off the list. We have a new regime for complying with the international standards called the 40 recommendations, and they are much more onerous than the past. And that was the basis upon which Jamaica was assessed in 2015, and the report demonstrates, the report that's on the CFATF website demonstrates the areas that Jamaica has to work on in terms of strengthening compliance with these standards. So it's important for the gaming sector, based upon all the things that the minister said you want to do, the legislation to be passed, the emerging of the commissions, it's important that you have sight of that report, and there's a dialogue between the regulators and the operators to ensure that all that is required to be done is in fact done, and so that Jamaica can have a continuing good reputation, not only within the CFATF circles, but also globally. Because these reports on Jamaica and all the other countries in the region, they are read and particular attention is paid to the ratings by investment houses around the world. And it means that if the ratings are bad, and if Jamaica doesn't implement the recommendations in the report, It means that the ability of this country to attract and maintain foreign direct investment in this sector, the gaming sector, and other areas of investment would suffer because countries around the world do not wish to be associated with countries in this region if they are perceived to have weak AML-CFT regimes which pose a threat to the international financial system. Because those countries will be telling their institutions how they should deal with entities, persons, business transactions, business relationships emanating from Jamaica. So it's important, as I said before, reputation, 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 compliance, 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 which should be very high with the international standards so that Jamaica's reputation does not suffer. Because between 1999 and 2000, 1999 and to date, several countries in the region were blacklisted. And the economic impact was very telling because of the loss of reputation. One country was blacklisted by 3 organizations at the same time. The FATF, which is the parent body for the CFATF, the OECD in relation to harmful tax regimes, and also the Financial Stability Board, because it was felt that countries in the region pose a threat to the international financial system. So being placed on these 3 lists was very damaging to this country's reputation. And ministers devoted $35 million to form a secretariat in this particular country to face off against the officials from these 3 organizations to get themselves off that list. And they were successful, but it came at a cost. Because the money that was devoted to the compliance function could have been devoted elsewhere, for social work, for hospitals, for job creation, for internal investment. So the countries felt the pain of being placed on a list. And things were done to try to see whether this would not happen again. But again and again, over the past 15 years, countries were dilatory in terms of ensuring that their architecture for AML-CFT compliance was strong. And because of that slowness in getting their act together, as it were, they were placed on lists again and again and again. So we are hoping that with this 4th round of assessments, that this will not occur, that the countries would move fast to rectify any problems that are seen, because something that I call a ticking time bomb on slow release is happening in this region. And countries around the region are suffering economically and very significantly so because of de-risking. Because major correspondent banks are saying that this region still has, no matter what we've done in terms of strengthening our structures, no matter all of that work, correspondent banks across the world are still saying that this region has countries with weak anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism regimes. Now there's a gap in this sector, the gaming sector, because whilst there's protection for AML-CFT, the regime as it stands at the minute does not extend to terrorist financing. So that's something that this country has to fix. It's all in the report. You can go on the website and look and see where the deficiencies are and the steps that you have to take, both as the sector, the industry, and the regulators, to engage with the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee to rectify the problems as expeditiously as possible. Because if we continue to be seen as countries with weak AML-CFT regimes, then the economic impact will continue. And again, the ability to attract and maintain foreign direct investment will suffer. The ability of the country to make jobs will suffer. The ability of the country to generate revenue will suffer. And all the plans that the minister spoke about today would suffer if this de-risking continues. Because the ultimate goal or the ultimate result of de-risking is the country and the region being cut off from the international financial system. And this is not hyperbole. This prospect is real. So wherever you are, as stakeholders, with the best interests of the national reputation in mind, with the best interests of the regional reputation in mind, it's incumbent upon all of us to ensure that we do our bit in terms of stronger compliance with the international standards, so that this incident, the incidents of de-risking, could end. My time is up. Thank you.
Okay, we just learned a little bit about what we have to do. And Calvin, just tell us, our economic lifeline in this region depends to a large extent on correspondent banking. And certainly in Jamaica, we can say a lot of efforts have been taken to really comply with our own minimum standards and our own guidelines. Do you see this de-risking move undermining the region's AML CFT efforts and the continued thrust to comply with FATF's recommendation?
Well, I would say yes, because the economic implications for the continuing of the de-risking issue is significant for the region and the ability of the countries to comply with the international standard. Because if this were to continue, and the ability of the countries to generate revenue to do all the things that are required in terms of strengthening the criminal justice system, ensuring that the regulatory framework for the banks, the insurance companies, the security sector, the new stakeholders, which are the designated non-financial businesses and professions, which are gaming, casino, real estate, lawyers, accountants. If the ability of the country to generate revenue, to make good provisions for protecting the national AML CFT architecture, if that's not done, then the region will suffer and will continue to be blacklisted. So we have to get rid of the problem of de-risking, and we can only do so if we enhance our international reputation by demonstrating to the international community that we are complying with the international standard. So it's incumbent again to, the reputation mantra, compliance mantra should be stuck in our minds to ensure we do our bit wherever we are to reduce this de-risking problem.
Okay, so what are some of the lessons learned in the region, and say, for instance, in Trinidad and Tobago, that can be shared to help our operators in the gambling industry align with FATF recommendations and international best practices?
Okay, with regard to Trinidad and Tobago, we have something there called private members clubs, and they generate lots of cash. And about a year ago, they were being debanked or de-risked because banks were saying that engaging or offering banking services to this sector was inimical to their national and global reputation and affecting their relationships with correspondent banks. So the intention was that this sector should be debanked, but the government intervened, the central bank, because of macroeconomic considerations. In Trinidad and Tobago, the private clubs sector, they employ lots of single mothers, and it was felt that this was too important part of the population to allow the de-risking or the debanking of the sector, which would have ended the operations to see so many people unemployed. So what they did, they spoke to the Minister of Finance, I understand, they spoke to the governor of the central bank, and together the sector, the operators in the sector, and the central bank and the Ministry of Finance engaged the banks, and eventually the banks relented. So the prospects are real in terms of if you don't comply, and it may mean that the government and stakeholders may look at the bigger picture in terms of protecting the national economic development, and therefore sort of like finessing the impact of de-risking. However, this could be done nationally, but it's not easy to do that in terms of getting stakeholders to come together and forming and getting to a solution. It's difficult to do that globally because the banks, the major correspondent banks, they have a duty to their shareholders, and there are various things around the world happening within the FATF happening within the Office of the Controller of the Currency in the US in trying to get the parties together to reduce the incidence of de-risking. But the banks are private sector entities, and they have responsibilities to their shareholders, and never mind the moral suasion that organizations like the OCC may have. At the end of the day, they have their private sector interests to protect, and that, if it means withdrawing from the region, then that will continue. So it means that our political directorate may have to get involved in terms of this de-risking problem.
So you have really touched on my next question about what policyholders and key stakeholders, such as the Jamaican government and any other Caribbean region government, that what they can do to assure the local and the corresponding banks that the gaming industry is really part of the legitimate economy, which needs to maintain a business account. There seems to be that still issue of we have implemented, yet still the banks are having their concern. What else can be done?
Well, I think, again, it comes back to reputation, because as I said before, the region is doing quite a lot in terms of complying with the international standards. And at the end of the third round, we have countries that are what I would call centers of excellence. And the plans for the Commission to merge with other commissions, and I think it's on the cards in St. Lucia as well. I think the centers of excellence for the gaming sector, Bahamas is one center. There's lots to be learned in terms of what you want to do and how you can train. But this is a sector that's important for the region. It comes back again to the reputation. It comes back to the ability of the governments to devote the resources that are necessary for the compliance function, and also to tell the world that when we have best practices, we have to use our high commissions and our embassies around the world to spread the good news of the region. Because the global regulators, global investment houses are making decisions based upon what they perceive to be the region's level of compliance. And so what we have to do, we have to ensure that these people who are impacting the economic well-being of the region, that they are told the truth in terms of the state of compliance with AML-CFT. Because if we don't do that, then the bad decisions, decisions that are inimical to our interests will continue to be made based upon inaccurate information. And just to give you a case in point, in one country, and I'm sure they won't mind me saying this, this is Belize. They are suffering significantly in terms of this de-risking issue. And there was one case in which a bank withdrew from Belize because of their perceptions. When the regulators in Belize showed the particular bank the accurate facts as to the state of play with compliance, they accepted that they were wrong, but they decided, yes, we have to continue to pull out. So it's incumbent upon all of us around the world to make sure that the good news, we tell the proper story of this region in terms of compliance. And importantly as well, that we do what we are required to do in terms of compliance. Because I don't know if you're aware of the US INCSA report, the US State Department International Narcotics Control Strategy Report for 2017. It lists 21 countries in the region as of major money laundering concern. Now, because of the reports that are on the CFATF website and the follow-up work that the countries have done in terms of rectifying identified deficiencies, the countries have been very vociferous in terms of pushing back against the US State Department in terms saying this is inaccurate and you need to change it. So that debate is going on at the minute. But again, it's incumbent upon us to tell our story, but more importantly, it's incumbent upon us to do the work in terms of rectifying our AML-CFT architectures so that they can be in compliance with the international standards. Because if we don't, the facts will be laid bare. We can't hide from this. Because the big countries have embassies operating in the region, and they collect data on us. So if we don't do the work that we are required to do, I'm sorry, then the story would be told. So we've taken on these obligations, we just have to do them. We have to comply. with the standards?
Thank you. It was great having this conversation. The issue of de-risking and regional gambling industry is really serious business. It is my firm view that there remains a vital role for key stakeholders in the gambling industry, and by extension, the financial sector, and key policyholders to make a forum for the dialogue and facilitation of collaborative solutions to these common challenges, not just affecting Jamaica, but the wider Caribbean region. With avenues such as these, we can share and exchange ideas, and no doubt it makes the oneness on common and joint responsibility to seek solutions to actions or measures which have an adverse effect on economic stability. For gaming operators and others in the gambling industry, we now see greater efforts taken to strengthen your AML CFT programs. I wish to reinforce the need to move with alacrity towards increasing the effectiveness levels and call on business owners, entrepreneurs, and shareholders to play a greater role in encouraging your staff to raise the compliance levels in your organization, that which we all desire. Of course, the related threat of terrorist financing cannot be ignored. As we move forward, the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Commission and similar other Caribbean regulators will work with our customers, our licensees, key partners, and stakeholders in finding practical solutions impacting the industry. Furthermore, it cannot be stressed too often that partnership and collaboration among respective key stakeholders and authorities is important to enable us to resist the threat of money laundering and terrorist financing to the gambling industry. Let me once again express thanks to Calvin of CFATF for an informative presentation and chat. I'm confident his presentation will energize and better equip us to raise effectiveness standards in our various entities. Thank you.